The wallet was cracked leather, worn thin at the edges, the kind you'd find at a gas station for $12. Sadie turned it over in her hands under the flickering fluorescent light of the Greyhound station, feeling the weight of someone's entire life compressed into fraying fabric and faded receipts. But before we step deeper into this memory, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Like this video so this story reaches more hearts, and subscribe to follow the next journeys. It was 3 a.m. in Austin, Texas, and the bus station smelled like burnt coffee and diesel exhaust. Sadie Coleman sat on a plastic bench that had been bolted to the floor sometime in the 80s, her duffel bag wedged between her boots. She'd been cleaning tables at the station diner for 6 hours, her feet aching, her apron spotted with grease and ketchup. The wallet had been left on table 9, tucked beneath a discarded newspaper, as if whoever owned it had simply forgotten it existed. She should have turned it in to Lost and Found. Should have handed it to Manuel at the front desk and clocked out, gone home to the studio apartment she shared with 2 other waitresses on the east side, where the rent was cheap and the plumbing unreliable. But something made her open it. Maybe it was the way the leather felt against her palm, soft and apologetic. Maybe it was the exhaustion that made her curious about other people's lives when her own felt so small. Inside, there was no cash, just a driver's license, a credit card, and a photograph. The license showed a man's face, sharp-featured and serious, with dark eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. Carter Donovan, age 37. The address listed was in Westlake Hills, which meant money, the kind of money that didn't ride Greyhound buses at 3 a.m. The photograph was older, creased down the middle. A woman with kind eyes standing in front of a farmhouse, her hand shading her face from the sun. On the back, in faded ink, Mom. Last good day. Sadie felt something tighten in her chest. She knew about last good days. She knew about photographs you carried long after the person in them was gone. The diner was closing. Manuel was flipping chairs onto tables, the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. Sadie stood, the wallet still in her hand, and made a decision that would unravel everything she thought she understood about the distance between her world and someone else's. She would return it, not to Lost and Found, where it would sit in a cardboard box for 30 days before being thrown away. She would take it to the address on the license. Westlake Hills was only a 40-minute bus ride, and she had tomorrow off. It was the right thing to do. The kind of thing her mother would have done, back when her mother was still alive, back when doing the right thing felt like it mattered. Sadie tucked the wallet into her bag and walked out into the Texas night, where the air was thick with heat even in the small hours, and the sky above the highway was stained orange from the city lights. She didn't know that the man in the photograph had been searching for that wallet for 3 days. Didn't know that it was the only thing he had left of a life he'd tried to forget. Didn't know that returning it would mean stepping into a world that would pull her under like a current, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to escape. All she knew was that someone had lost something that mattered, and she was tired of living in a world where people didn't help each other anymore. She caught the last bus east, the wallet pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The house wasn't a house. It was an estate. All glass and limestone, perched on a hill overlooking the city like a monument to everything Sadie would never have. She stood at the gate the next morning, her thumb hovering over the intercom button, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Thrift store sundress, scuffed boots. Hair pulled back in a braid that had started to unravel on the bus ride over. She almost turned around, almost shoved the wallet back in her bag and walked the 4 miles back to the main road. But then she thought about the photograph, about the woman with the kind eyes, and pressed the button. The voice that answered was male, clipped, distant. Yes? I found a wallet. It belongs to Carter Donovan. I wanted to return it. There was a pause. Then the gate buzzed open. The driveway curved through live oaks and manicured grass, the kind of landscape that required a team of people to maintain. Sadie walked slowly, her boots crunching on the gravel, feeling like an intruder. When she reached the front door, it opened before she could knock. The man standing there was taller than she'd expected. The photograph on the license hadn't captured the way he carried himself, like someone who'd learned early that the world would bend if you pushed hard enough. He wore a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark slacks, no shoes. His hair was slightly too long, falling over his forehead in a way that softened the hard lines of his face. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark and guarded and exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You found my wallet," he said. It wasn't a question. Sadie nodded and pulled it from her bag, holding it out like an offering. "At the bus station. You left it on a table." Carter took it, his fingers brushing hers for half a second. He opened it, checked the contents, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You didn't take the credit card." "No. Most people would have. I'm not most people." He studied her for a long moment, and Sadie felt something shift in the air between them, subtle as a change in temperature. "Come inside," he said finally. "I'll get you a reward." "I don't want a reward." "Then come inside anyway." He stepped back, holding the door open. "It's 100 degrees out here, and you look like you walked." She had, 4 miles from the bus stop because she couldn't afford the rideshare. But she didn't say that. She stepped into the cool, cavernous entryway, where everything was white marble and reclaimed wood, art on the walls that probably cost more than she made in a year. Carter led her through the house to a kitchen that was bigger than her entire apartment. He poured 2 glasses of water from a fridge that had a screen on the door, handed her one without asking if she wanted it. She drank it in 3 long swallows, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sadie. Sadie Coleman." "Sadie." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. "You work at the bus station?" "The diner. Night shift." He nodded slowly, leaning back against the counter. There was something unguarded in his posture now, as if her honesty had disarmed him. "I was there meeting someone, a driver. I don't usually carry that wallet. It's old. Useless, really. But I needed the photo inside." Sadie thought about the woman in the picture, about last good days. "Your mother?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "That you lost her." Carter looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sadie felt something in her chest catch and hold. It was the kind of look that made you feel seen, not just observed. The kind that made you forget about the distance between Westlake Hills and the East Side, between worn boots and marble floors. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for bringing it back." She should have left then. Should have set down the glass and walked back out into the heat and returned to her small, safe life. But something kept her rooted there, standing in that enormous kitchen, watching the way the morning light cut through the windows and painted shadows across his face. "Why'd you keep it?" she asked. "If it's useless." Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the wallet again, pulled out the photograph, held it so she could see. "Because she's the only person who ever believed I was worth something before I had money to prove it." The words hung between them, raw and true, and Sadie understood then that wealth was just another kind of armor, and underneath it, people carried the same wounds. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. Neither did he. Sadie didn't expect to see Carter Donovan again. She went back to her life. The night shifts, the grease-stained apron, the studio apartment where the air conditioner rattled and died every 3rd day. She told herself that returning the wallet had been a good deed. Nothing more. That men like Carter existed in a different stratosphere, one she'd only glimpsed for an hour before gravity pulled her back to Earth. But 3 days later, he walked into the diner. It was 2 a.m, the dead hour when the only customers were truckers and insomniacs. Sadie was wiping down the counter when the door chimed, and she looked up to see him standing there in jeans and a t-shirt, looking nothing like a CEO and everything like someone who couldn't sleep. "Coffee," he said, sliding onto a stool. "Black." Her hands shook as she poured it. She could feel Manuel watching from the kitchen, could feel the eyes of the only other waitress, Christina, tracking Carter's every move. Men like him didn't come to places like this unless they were lost or slumming. "You following me?" Sadie asked, trying to keep her voice light. "I was driving," Carter said. "Saw the sign. Figured I owed you a conversation." "You don't owe me anything. Maybe I wanted one anyway." He stayed for an hour, didn't touch the coffee after the first sip, just sat there while Sadie worked, watching her move between tables, refilling ketchup bottles, scraping gum off the underside of booth seats. When her shift ended at 4, he was still there. "Can I drive you home?" he asked. Every instinct told her to say no, to keep the distance between them intact, to protect herself from the inevitable moment when he'd realize she wasn't interesting enough to keep around. But exhaustion made her reckless, and she nodded. His car was a black Tesla, silent as a ghost. Sadie gave him directions to the east side, watching the neighborhoods change through the window as they drove, from downtown's bright lights to the dim streets where she lived, where the houses had bars on the windows and the sidewalks were cracked from tree roots and neglect. "Here," she said, pointing to a duplex with peeling paint. Carter pulled over but didn't unlock the doors. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Why'd you really bring back the wallet? You could have sold the credit card number online, made a few $100. Sadie looked at him, at the way the streetlight cast half his face in shadow. "Because it mattered to you. And I know what it's like to lose the only thing you have left of someone. Your mom, my dad, cancer, 3 years ago." She swallowed hard. "He left me his watch. I wore it every day until someone stole it from the locker room at work. I filed a police report, but they never found it. After that, I decided I'd never be the person who takes something that matters to someone else." Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and rough in a way that surprised her. "I'm sorry you lost that." "Me too." They sat there in the dark car, their hands linked across the center console, and Sadie felt the weight of all the things she wasn't saying. That she was 26 and exhausted. That she sent half her paycheck to her younger brother in San Antonio so he could finish community college. That she'd given up on the idea of wanting more because wanting hurt too much when you couldn't have it. "I'd like to see you again," Carter said. "If you'd let me." "Why?" "Because you're real. Because you don't want anything from me." "You don't know that." "Don't I?" Sadie pulled her hand back, suddenly afraid of how much she wanted to say yes. I don't fit in your world, Carter. You saw where I live. You saw what I do. Whatever you think this is, it's not going to work." "Maybe I don't want it to fit," he said. "Maybe I'm tired of things that work." She opened the door before she could change her mind, stepped out into the humid night. "Thanks for the ride, Sadie." But she was already walking away, her heart pounding, knowing that if she looked back, she'd stay. And staying would mean letting herself hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing she knew. Carter didn't give up. He came back to the diner the next night, and the night after that. He'd sit at the counter, order coffee he never drank, and talk to her in the spaces between customers. He told her about his company, tech infrastructure, something about data centers that she didn't fully understand but pretended to. He told her about growing up in a trailer park outside Amarillo, about a mother who'd worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on, about clawing his way through community college and then UT Austin, about the scholarship that saved him and the professor who told him he'd never make it. "I wanted to prove him wrong," Carter said one night, his voice low. "Turns out spite's a pretty good motivator." Sadie laughed despite herself. "Is that what drives you? Spite?" "Not anymore." He looked at her in that way he had, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Now I don't know what drives me. That's the problem." The problem was that Sadie was falling for him. Slowly, against her better judgment, in the quiet hours of the morning when the diner was empty, and he'd tell her things she suspected he'd never told anyone else. She learned that he hated the house in Westlake Hills, that he'd bought it because it was what successful people did, not because it felt like home. That he had a brother in Denver he hadn't spoken to in 5 years over something neither of them could remember. That his mother had died of a stroke 2 years ago, sudden and cruel, and he'd been in a board meeting when it happened, too important to answer his phone. "I got there an hour after she passed," he said, and his voice cracked just enough that Sadie's heart broke. "I never got to say goodbye." She reached across the counter and covered his hand with hers, and this time, neither of them pulled away. But the universe has a way of punishing hope. It came in the form of a woman named Vanessa Marlowe, tall and glacial in a silk blouse and heels that could have paid Sadie's rent for 3 months. She walked into the diner on a Friday night, looked around with the kind of disdain that came from never having been anywhere that didn't have valet parking, and sat down next to Carter. "So this is where you've been hiding," Vanessa said, her voice honeyed and sharp. She looked at Sadie like she was part of the furniture. "Coffee, please. Oat milk if you have it, which I'm sure you don't." "We have regular milk," Sadie said evenly. "Then I'll pass." Vanessa turned to Carter, ignoring Sadie entirely. "We need to talk about the merger. You've been ignoring Marcus's calls." "I've been busy." "Busy?" Vanessa laughed, cold and bright. "Carter, you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. You don't get to be busy playing whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at the diner, at Sadie. "People are starting to talk. Your board is concerned." Carter's jaw tightened. "My personal life isn't their concern. Everything you do is their concern. You know that." Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Marcus said if you don't close the London deal by the end of the month, they're calling for a vote of no confidence. You can't afford distractions right now." The word distraction hit Sadie like a slap. She turned away, busying herself with wiping down tables that were already clean, her hands shaking. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd known from the beginning this was temporary, that men like Carter didn't end up with women like her, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. When she finally looked back, Vanessa was gone, and Carter was still sitting there, staring at his untouched coffee. "You should go," Sadie said quietly. "You have important things to do." "Sadie, it's fine. Really." She forced a smile that felt like glass in her throat. "Thanks for the company. Good luck with your merger." She walked into the back before he could respond, locked herself in the bathroom, and let herself cry for exactly 3 minutes. Then she washed her face, fixed her braid, and went back to work. Carter was gone. The coffee cup sat on the counter, still full, with a $100 bill folded underneath it. Sadie stared at the money for a long time, feeling something inside her harden and break all at once. Then she shoved it in the tip jar and went back to refilling sugar packets, because that's what you did when you were a realist. You kept moving. You survived. But that night, when she got home, she found a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry. This isn't what I want. Give me time to fix this. Please." She didn't respond. She deleted the message and tried to forget the way his hand had felt in hers, warm and solid and real. Tried to forget that for a few stolen hours, she'd let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, The distance between their worlds wasn't as vast as it seemed. Sadie didn't hear from Carter for 2 weeks. She told herself it was better this way, that whatever had been building between them was a fantasy, the kind of story that only worked in movies where the lighting was soft and nobody had to worry about rent. She picked up extra shifts, sent money to her brother, avoided looking at her phone, but the universe wasn't done with them yet. It was a Tuesday afternoon, her day off, and she was at the H-E-B on Riverside, buying the cheapest pasta and the vegetables that were marked down because they'd be bad tomorrow. She was debating whether she could afford the name-brand tomato sauce when she heard his voice. Sadie. She turned, and there he was, standing in the middle of the pasta aisle with a basket that contained only coffee and a loaf of bread, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there was something raw in his expression that made her forget how to breathe. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Shopping, same as you." "Carter, you live in Westlake Hills. There's a Whole Foods 2 minutes from your house." "I wasn't shopping at home." He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something clean. "I've been staying downtown, at a hotel. I needed to think." "About what?" "About what I want my life to look like." He set down his basket, his eyes never leaving hers. "I closed the London deal, told the board I was taking a leave of absence. Marcus nearly had a stroke, but I don't care. I'm tired of living for other people's expectations." Sadie felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "That doesn't have anything to do with me." "It has everything to do with you." Carter's voice was low, urgent. "You asked me once why I kept coming back to the diner. I told you it was because you were real, but that's not the whole truth. I kept coming back because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before the money and the company and all the shit that's supposed to matter, but doesn't. You make me want to be better, not richer, not more successful, just better. Carter, I know I handled this wrong. I know Vanessa made you feel like you were something I could just walk away from, but you're not. You're the first real thing I've felt in years, and I'm terrified of screwing it up, but I'm more terrified of not trying." Sadie stood there in the fluorescent light of the grocery store, surrounded by strangers and discount pasta, and felt something crack open inside her chest. All the armor she'd built, all the walls she'd erected to protect herself from wanting things she couldn't have, they crumbled like sand. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of this. Of you. Of wanting something and having it disappear." Her voice broke. "Everyone I've ever loved has left, Carter. My mom, my dad, my ex-boyfriend who decided I wasn't worth staying for. I can't do that again." Carter reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, his touch gentle in a way that undid her. "I can't promise I won't screw this up. I probably will, at least a few times. But I can promise I won't leave. Not unless you ask me to. And even then, I'll fight like hell to change your mind." "Why me?" The question came out broken, desperate. "You could have anyone. Someone who fits. Someone who knows which fork to use at those fancy dinners. Someone who..." "I don't want someone who fits." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I want you. The woman who walked 4 miles in the heat to return a worthless wallet because it mattered to someone. The woman who works night shifts to put her brother through school. The woman who's so damn strong she doesn't even realize it. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Then be terrified with me." And there, in the middle of the H-E-B on Riverside, with the PA system announcing a sale on ground beef and an elderly woman maneuvering her cart around them with a knowing smile, Sadie Coleman made a choice. She rose up on her toes, wrapped her arms around Carter Donovan's neck, and kissed him like she was jumping off a cliff and trusting he'd catch her. He did. His arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and the kiss was everything she'd imagined and nothing like it. Messy and desperate and real. It tasted like coffee and salt, and the promise of something she'd stopped letting herself believe in. When they finally broke apart, Carter pressed his forehead to hers, both of them breathing hard. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. I don't care." He laughed, and it sounded like relief. "Let's get out of here. Let's go do something completely impractical. I have to pay for my groceries." "Leave them. I'll buy you better groceries." "Carter, Sadie." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously like joy. "Let me take you on an actual date. Please, let me do this right." She should have said no. Should have been practical, responsible. But practicality had never gotten her anything but exhaustion and a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. So instead, she took his hand and said, "Okay." They left the groceries in the basket and walked out into the Texas afternoon, where the heat shimmered off the asphalt and the sky was impossibly blue. And for the first time in 3 years, Sadie let herself hope. The date turned into 2, then 5, then a blur of stolen moments that stitched themselves into something bigger than either of them had expected. Carter took her to places she'd never been. A private concert at the Moody Theater, a helicopter ride over the hill country at sunset, a dinner on the rooftop of a hotel where the city spread out below them like scattered diamonds. But the moments she treasured most were the quiet ones. Sunday mornings at her apartment when he'd show up with coffee and kolaches from the Czech bakery on Manor Road. Late nights at the diner when he'd sit at the counter and make her laugh until Manuel threatened to kick them both out. The way he'd hold her hand while they walked around Zilker Park, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm like he was memorizing the map of her. "Move in with me," he said one night, 3 months after the grocery store. They were at his house, their house, he kept insisting, though she still felt like a visitor. She was curled up on the couch in one of his t-shirts, her legs draped across his lap, and he was looking at her like she was something precious. "Carter, I barely stay over twice a week." "Exactly. That's the problem." He shifted, turning to face her fully. "I want you there every night. I want to wake up next to you. I want your books on my shelves and your toothbrush in my bathroom, and your terrible taste in reality TV dominating my streaming queue. My taste isn't terrible. You watch shows about people buying storage units. That's quality television." He laughed, pulling her closer. "Move in with me, Sadie, please." She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But the fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest. What if this doesn't work? What if 6 months from now you realize I don't belong here, and I've given up my apartment and Then we'll figure it out. His voice was steady, certain. But I don't think that's going to happen. Do you? Sadie thought about the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Thought about how he'd shown up at the diner during her shift last week with flowers, just because. How he'd driven to San Antonio with her to visit her brother and spent the whole afternoon talking to him about cars and college, and never once made her feel like he had somewhere more important to be. "No," she admitted. "I don't." "Then take the leap." She did. She gave notice on her apartment, packed up her sparse belongings, and moved into the house that felt less like a mansion and more like home every day. Carter hired movers, but Sadie insisted on packing herself, wanting to maintain some shred of independence. He helped anyway, making jokes about her collection of secondhand books and the ridiculous number of coffee mugs she'd accumulated. "You know I have a full set of dishes, right?" he said, holding up a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Employee." "That's from my dad. It's staying." "Then it's staying." He set it carefully in the box, and Sadie loved him a little more. but not everything was perfect. 3 weeks after she moved in, Carter's brother called. Sadie was in the kitchen when she heard Carter's voice from the office, tight with an anger she'd never heard before. Don't you dare act like you care now. Where were you when Mom was dying? Where were you at her funeral? She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt or leave him alone. Carter was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenched into a fist. I don't have time for this. I'm done, Ryan. I've been done. He hung up without saying goodbye, threw the phone onto the desk hard enough that Sadie flinched. Carter. He turned, and the look on his face nearly broke her. He wants money. That's all he ever wants. Shows up every few years, plays the We're Family card, and expects me to write a check. Sadie crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his shoulders. What did you tell him? I told him no. Carter's voice was muffled against her hair. But it's eating me up. Because what if I'm wrong? What if he really does need help and I'm just... You're not wrong. She pulled back, forcing him to look at her. You're protecting yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. I should be able to fix this. I have more money than I know what to do with. I should be able to... Money doesn't fix people, Carter. You know that. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. That night, they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Thank you, he said into the darkness. For what? For not judging me, for understanding. Sadie kissed his collarbone, felt him relax beneath her touch. We all have people we can't save. It doesn't make you a bad person. What if I'm just like him? What if the only reason I'm not asking for handouts is because I don't need them? You're not like him. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at his face in the moonlight slanting through the window. You're kind. You're generous. You showed up at a grocery store in the middle of the day because you needed to tell me how you felt. You're nothing like him. Carter reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch achingly gentle. How'd I get so lucky? You returned a cheap wallet and I happened to be nosy. He laughed, pulling her down for a kiss that tasted like trust and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to forever. And Sadie let herself fall, knowing that if she broke, he'd be there to gather the pieces. 2 years later, Sadie stood in the kitchen of their home. Not his home, their home, mixing batter for pancakes while morning light spilled through the windows like liquid gold. The house had changed since she moved in. Her books lined the shelves in the living room. Her photos hung on the walls. Her mother's quilt was draped over the back of the couch. The place that had once felt like a museum now felt lived in, loved. Carter came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. Smells good. You say that every time I cook. Because it's true every time. She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and marveled at how natural this had become. The morning routine, the easy affection, the way they moved around each other like a dance they'd been practicing for years instead of months. I have something to tell you, Carter said. Sadie's heart skipped. Good something or bad something? Good, I think. He turned her around, his hands settling on her hips. I got a call from a nonprofit yesterday. They work with kids aging out of foster care, helping them get to college. They want me to join their board. Carter, that's amazing. There's more. He paused, his eyes searching hers. I'm thinking about stepping back from the company, not leaving entirely, just taking a less active role. I want to do something that matters, really matters. And I was thinking maybe we could do it together. Together how? Start a foundation. Use some of my money, our money, to help kids like I used to be. Scholarships, mentorship programs, housing assistance. I know it's a lot to ask, and your life is finally stable, but yes. The word came out before he'd finished, certain and clear. Carter blinked. Yes? Yes. Sadie smiled, feeling something bright and warm unfurl in her chest. I'm in. Whatever you need. He kissed her then, deep and grateful, and when they broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I don't deserve you. Too bad. You're stuck with me. They ate pancakes on the back patio, where the Texas morning was still cool enough to be pleasant, and talked about their plans. The foundation would start small, maybe a pilot program in Austin, then expand outward. They'd focus on first-generation college students, on kids who had the drive but not the resources. Kids like Carter had been, like Sadie's brother still was. We should tell Daniel, Sadie said. He could help with outreach. Already texted him last night. Carter grinned. He's in, said he wants to be on the board. Sadie felt tears prick her eyes. Her brother, who'd struggled so hard, who'd worked construction during the day and studied at night, was graduating next month with a degree in education. The money she'd sent him, the money Carter had quietly supplemented, had made that possible. And now they could do the same for hundreds of other kids. My dad would have liked you, she said suddenly. Carter reached across the table and took her hand. Yeah? Yeah. He always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they did with it. You're doing something that matters, Carter. You're changing lives. We're changing lives, he corrected. This is ours, Sadie. All of it. Later that afternoon, they drove back to the east side, to the neighborhood where Sadie had lived in that cramped studio apartment. The diner was still there, Manuel still running the front desk, Christina still slinging coffee and taking no shit from truckers. Sadie and Carter walked in together, and Manuel's face split into a wide grin. There she is, my favorite customer who never tips. I tipped you for 2 years straight, Sadie protested, laughing. And then you went and got rich. Now you're too good for us. Never. She hugged him over the counter, breathing in the familiar smell of coffee and hash browns and home. We're here because we need your help. They spent an hour explaining the foundation, and by the time they left, Manuel had agreed to spread the word in the community to help identify kids who needed support. Christina promised to volunteer. Even the cook, a gruff man named Pete, who rarely said more than 3 words, nodded approvingly and said he knew some kids who could use the help. As they walked back to the car, Carter laced his fingers through Sadie's. This is good. This feels right. It does. They drove back to the house, but instead of going inside, Carter led her to the porch, where they sat on the steps and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city sprawled below them, vast and complicated, full of people struggling and surviving and hoping. Do you ever think about that night? Carter asked quietly. When you found the wallet? All the time. I was in a dark place then. I'd just closed a deal that made me another $50 million. And all I could think about was how empty it felt. How much I missed my mom. How I'd built this whole empire. And there was nobody I wanted to share it with. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were soft in the dying light. And then you showed up. This woman who walked 4 miles to return something worthless because it mattered to someone. And I thought, maybe there's still good in the world. Maybe I haven't lost everything that matters. Sadie felt tears slip down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. I thought I was just returning a wallet. You were returning more than that. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. You were reminding me what it means to be human, to care about people, not profit margins, to do the right thing even when nobody's watching. Carter, marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible and perfect. Sadie's breath caught, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free of her chest. What? Marry me, Sadie Coleman. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple, elegant, a single diamond on a silver band. I don't have a speech prepared. I don't have some elaborate plan. I just know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Building this foundation, changing the world, eating your pancakes every Sunday. Marry me. Sadie looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they'd built from a chance encounter and a cheap wallet, and the willingness to be vulnerable. And she thought about her father, about last good days, about how the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger, and they kissed there on the porch as the stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light in the vast Texas sky. And Sadie understood then that love wasn't about fitting into someone else's world. It was about building a new world together, one small kindness at a time. Inside the house, on the kitchen counter, sat the old wallet, cracked leather, worn thin at the edges, worthless and priceless all at once. Carter had framed the photograph of his mother and hung it above his desk, but he'd kept the wallet as a reminder of the night that changed everything. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures could reshape entire lives. And as Sadie stood there in the twilight, Carter's arms around her, his heart beating steady against hers, she thought about all the people they'd help, all the lives they'd touch, all the cheap wallets and expensive kindnesses still waiting to be found. If this story touched you, leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for the next journey.